Why were all these well-qualified senior military officials removed? The New York Times reports they were all, quote, dismissed as part of a campaign to root out diversity, equity, and inclusion from the military and restore what Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth has described as a warrior ethos, end quote. Indeed, Hegseth's views on women in the military are no secret. In his book, The War on Warriors, published just last year, while admitting that he believes women have performed well in support roles, quote, women in the infantry, women in combat on purpose is another story. Dads push us to take risks. Moms put the training wheels on our bikes. We need moms, but not in the military, especially in combat units, end quote. The Atlantic's Tom Nichols puts it plainly, quote, the message to the women of the United States from the current Commander-in-Chief and his Secretary of Defense amounts to a sexist warning. Feel free to join the military and serve your country, but know your place.
Hello, Bobby Jones here from MeidasTouch and Ballard Media Networks. In the wake of breaking news that President Trump has taken the unprecedented step of personally interviewing 4-star officer candidates in the American military, now is the perfect time to highlight how his administration is changing the highest ranks of the American military into its own Zampolit. The Zampolit were embedded Communist Party representatives aboard Soviet naval vessels and military units to ensure ideological loyalty to the USSR and the Communist Party. Trump is creating the American version, starting with the female flag officers. Since taking office in early 2025, Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth has overseen an unprecedented purge of high-ranking military leaders, disproportionately targeting women and other officers labeled as woke. In the name of eliminating wokeness and diversity programs from the ranks, Hegseth and the Trump administration have removed several trailblazing female admirals and generals from their post. Critics argue that these firings amount to erasing women's hard-earned progress in the U.S. Armed Forces, a rollback motivated more by ideology than merit. One by one, female military leaders have been fired or reassigned under dubious pretext. Hegseth, a former Fox News host with strong opinions on women in combat, has long criticized efforts to integrate the force. Just months before his appointment, he stated bluntly on a podcast, quote, we should not have women in combat roles. It hasn't made us more effective, unquote. Although he softened his stance during his Senate confirmation hearing, allowing that women who meet standards should serve, his early tenure at the Pentagon has been defined by an aggressive rollback of programs seen as promoting diversity. He has even ordered an end to observances like Black History Month and Women's History Months in the military, claiming that highlighting specific groups erodes camaraderie. Now, by removing these prominent female leaders, Hegseth is effectively turning back the clock on representation. The upper ranks of the U.S. military are once again an old boys club. In this video, we will examine what is exactly happening, review the proud history of service of women in the U.S. military, profile the flag officers who've been pushed aside along with their impeccable credentials, and compare those credentials to Pete Hegseth's. The contrast is stark, and it underscores why many are alarmed at how American women in uniform, who have served with honor since the American Revolution, are being targeted. American women have served in the U.S. military since the Revolutionary War, often in unofficial roles like nurses, cooks, and even disguised soldiers like Deborah Sampson and Margaret Corbin. Throughout the 19th and 20th centuries, women continued to break barriers, from Clara Barton to Dr. Mary Walker in the Civil War, to over 400,000 women serving in uniform during World War II. Their growing contributions led to the 1948 Women's Armed Service Integration Act, granting women a permanent place in the American military. In the decades that followed, restrictions gradually lifted. Women entered the service academies, flew combat aircraft, served aboard warships, and by 2016 could fill all combat roles that they qualified for. Today, women make up about 16% of the armed forces and have risen to the highest ranks, including 4-star generals and admirals, with leaders like Admiral Fagan and General Lori Robinson making history at the top. Beginning in late January 2025, the Trump administration, with Hegseth as Secretary of Defense being confirmed, began removing a number of high-ranking women from positions of command. Observers note that these officers' credentials are unimpeachable and often fully in line with their predecessors. So let's take a look at these profiles of the women involved in these decisions, starting with Admiral Lisa Franchetti, the first female Navy Chief of Naval Operations, and how she was fired without cause. Admiral Franketti made history in 2023 by becoming the first woman to lead the U.S. Navy. A career surface warfare officer commissioned in the 1980s, Franketti commanded warships like the destroyer USS Ross and an entire naval groups during her nearly 40-year career. She served as Vice CNO in 2022 to 2023 and stepped up as acting CNO when her previous chief retired, ultimately earning her nomination and Senate confirmation to permanently fill the Navy's top job. By all accounts, Admiral Franketti was intimately qualified. She had commanded at every level, from a destroyer to a carrier strike group to U.S. Sixth Fleet in Europe. And her service record was on par with any previous CNO. In fact, Franketti was the first woman ever to sit on the Joint Chiefs of Staff, bringing a woman's perspective to the highest military council for the first time in 70 years. Yet, on February 21st, 2025, Hegseth abruptly removed Admiral Franketti as CNO, cutting short her tenure with no clear explanation. In a terse Friday night media news dump statement, Hegseth announced that he was requesting nominations for a new Navy chief, an open call for anybody who thinks they're qualified, while blandly thanking Franketti for her distinguished service. No specific cause or misconduct was cited, and the Navy itself was caught off guard, giving no role in removing its own top officer. The lack of rationale was striking, especially since Hegseth had singled out Franketti in a book prior to his appointment, deriding her promotion as driven by political optics rather than merit. Hegseth offered no evidence for that claim. Indeed, it is contradicted by Franketti's long list of accomplishments. Regardless, the results of this firing was immediate. The Navy lost a highly respected leader, and the Joint Chiefs suddenly had zero female representation once more. Franketti's ouster left the military without a single woman in a four-star leadership position, undoing recent progress towards diversity at the top. Sailors reacted with shock and outpouring of support for Franketti, recalling positive experiences with her leadership and mentorship. I am among the number of sailors she positively affected. Within the Pentagon, many female officers saw the move as a devastating signal. By failing to justify the firing, one woman told reporters, the Trump administration is sending a clear message. Women are no longer welcomed in the military's highest ranks. Admiral Linda Fagan is another path breaker who fell victim to the purge. In June 2022, Fagan became the first woman to lead a U.S. military branch when she assumed command as the 27th Commandant of the United States Coast Guard. With over 40 years in uniform, Fagan rose to the Coast Guard ranks, specializing in marine safety and maritime security. She had earned a reputation as a highly competent, no-nonsense officer. As Commandant, she oversaw about 42,000 active duty Coast Guardsmen, plus thousands of reservists, civilians, and volunteers, and was responsible for missions ranging from maritime rescue to drug interdiction. However, Fagan's historic tenure was cut shockingly short. On January 20th, 2025, mere hours after President Trump's inauguration, Fagan was relieved of command by the acting Secretary of Homeland Security, who oversees the Coast Guard in peacetime. This swift firing the day after the new administration took power clearly signaled a clean sweep. Unlike Franketti's ouster, the Department of Homeland Security did provide a list of reasons, though many viewed them as pretexts. According to reports, Fagan was accused of leadership deficiencies and operational failures in areas like border security and personnel recruitment. Specifically, officials claimed she had not effectively deployed Coast Guard assets to interdict drugs like fentanyl at the maritime border, and that she lacked innovative strategies. Notably, they also lambasted her excessive focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion policies, suggesting that the time spent on DEI at the Coast Guard Academy detracted from operational essentials. In essence, Fagan's emphasis on creating a more inclusive Coast Guard, something celebrated by many in 2022 when she took over, was recast as a liability under the new regime. Perhaps no removal was more symbolic as that of Vice Admiral Yvette Davids, the superintendent of the U.S. Naval Academy. This one is personal to me because I'm a 2001 graduate of that institution. Vice Admiral Davids, a 1989 Naval Academy graduate, became the first woman and first Hispanic American woman to lead the Naval Academy when she assumed the post in January 2024. Her appointment was hailed as a milestone for an institution that had only begun admitting women in the mid-70s. Davids is a highly accomplished officer in her own right. She commanded a frigate and later a guided missile cruiser. And earlier in her career, she was the first Hispanic female to command a U.S. Navy warship, earning a Las Primeras award for that achievement. Over 30 plus years of a career built on a record of surface warfare and strategic planning, obtaining postgraduate education, including a master's from the Naval War College, and rising to the ranks of a 3-star admiral. As superintendent, Davids was responsible for training and educating the next generation of Navy and Marine Corps officers at Annapolis. By all accounts, she performed excellently during her roughly 18 months in charge. Nevertheless, in July of 2025, the Pentagon announced that Vice Admiral Davids would be relieved as Naval Academy superintendent. Defense Secretary Hegseth moved to replace her with a male officer, Marine Corps Major General Michael Bortschettel, marking the first time in the Academy's 180-year history that a Marine and not a Navy admiral was nominated to take command of the school. Officials were quick to insist that this was not a dismissal of Davids, but rather a routine reassignment. Indeed, the Navy concurrently announced that Davids had been nominated to serve on the staff of the Chief of Naval Operations as the Deputy CNO for Operations, Plans, and Strategies. In other words, she is being kicked upstairs to a headquarters staff job after just a year and a half of leading the Academy. The optics, however, are hard to ignore. The first woman ever to hold this prominent and very public position is being moved out, and her successor will be a man. The broader message was noted by many. Another woman moved out of another high visibility command role. Vice Admiral Shashana Chatfield is yet another highly accomplished woman leader shown the door. Until recently, Vice Admiral Chatfield served as the United States military representative to NATO's Military Committee, effectively America's senior uniformed envoy to the NATO alliance. In that role, she sat amongst NATO's top generals and admirals, the only woman on NATO's military committee at the time. Chatfield's background is impressive. A naval aviator by training, she flew H-60 Seahawk helicopters and deployed to combat zones like Afghanistan. She later commanded a provincial reconstruction team in Afghanistan, headed a helicopter wing, and even served as president of the U.S. Naval War College, becoming the first woman to lead that institution in 2019. She earned advanced degrees, including a master's at Harvard and a doctorate from the University of San Diego. In short, Chatfield is a scholar warrior with deep expertise in strategy and international relations, exactly the kind of officer one would want representing the United States at NATO. Despite her stellar resume, Vice Admiral Chatfield was fired in April of 2025 as part of what Reuters called an expanding national security purge by the administration. Allies were quietly informed that Chatfield had been removed from her post even before any public announcement. The Pentagon gave no immediate reason for her dismissal. However, multiple sources indicated the motive was again ideological. Chatfield was deemed woke. Let's compare the background of these women to that of Pete Hegseth. Each of these women mentioned devoted around 35 to 40 years of military service. They climbed the ranks through perseverance, repeatedly earning promotions to positions of greater responsibility. By contrast, Pete Hegseth's military career was relatively short and junior. Hegseth joined the Army National Guard in 2001 and served about 20 years part-time before retiring in 2021. He left service as a major in 2004, and that's a respectable rank, but far below the generals and admirals he's ousting. He never led anything approaching the scale of a service branch or major command. In fact, Hegseth had no Pentagon or Joint Command experience prior to becoming Secretary of Defense. During his confirmation hearing, even some senators noticed his thin resume for running the massive Defense Department. From the Revolutionary War to today, American women have been an integral part of our military. They have served, bled, and died for this country's freedom. They have also led, proving time and time again that leadership and its ability is not confined to one gender. The recent purge of these female flag officers under Pete Hegseth's department and his tenure is not just an attack on individual careers. It's viewed by many as an attack on the legacy of service. By firing or downgrading these trailblazing women, the administration is attempting to rewrite the narrative of who is, quote, fit, unquote, to serve and lead. It is turning back the clock on inclusivity and meritocracy and advancement, effectively telling every young woman in the ranks that no matter how hard you work or how high you rise, you can be swept aside for political expediency. This is more than unjust. It's dangerous. It threatens to hollow out the morale and discourage a significant portion of our all-volunteer force. Women currently comprise 16% of the armed forces, and their contributions are indispensable in everything from flying jets to cybersecurity to infantry patrols to bridge watchstanding in ships. Our military is stronger because of its women. The sisterhood of service stands alongside the brotherhood, and together they make the U.S. military the finest in the world. It has been that way since 1775, and with the resolve and recognition of true merit, it must remain so for future generations to come.
New Midas merch drop! Check out the latest pro-democracy sticker packs, t-shirts, hats, sweatshirts, and more, all at store.MeidasTouch.com.